Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. This is Pop Culture Moments with Maddie Ladner, and for this podcast, I'm going to be talking about the TV shows and movies that I've watched each week. So this is going to be a weekly update on the TV shows and movies, and every month I'll try to update you guys on the books that I read over the course of the month, or I'll try to do it weekly if I did read a whole book throughout the week, which I did this week, read one whole book. But before we get started with the TV shows and movies I've watched, I do have to announce World Burn by Renee Rapp, the soundtrack version of the Mean Girls movie, is available for streaming, and I almost died this morning because she sounds so good. I also love that they did it in a style that's not like the Broadway version, where she's not like constantly like hollering, like screaming, like really loud singing. Like it's only bits and pieces of it where she does go up there because she can. And I think that's really great because some people don't really like that. And I mean, I don't mind it, but like this isn't a Broadway movie. We don't need to be like, like crazy. So anyway, let's get into the TV shows and movies that I watched last week, because it's one day. This week's going to be the only exception to this rule where I do from literally Monday to Sunday. I'm going to do January 1st to today because I don't think I watched anything on the day before, because I think January 1st was a Tuesday. But if it was Monday, great, perfect. But anyway, whatever. So the first show I watched was What If Season 2, and I do want to talk about that because there are some fun things that happen this season. So What If, in case you're unaware, is an anthology series by Marvel that's a like what if this happened instead of what actually happened. It's a different like multiverse universe kind of ordeal, and I really find it to be really cool sometimes of what they come up with, and it's really fun. So spoiler warning. Here's your spoiler warning. So the coolest thing I thought they had was the episode about Hela, and I just loved seeing Bucky. I always love seeing Bucky in these episodes because you never know what kind of scenario in life Bucky's going to be in, and they did a really fun thing with this season with Bucky where he wasn't like where he didn't require like much effort to break the mind control. In fact, only one of the episodes I think they even had to break it, because the others he wasn't under mind control. And I thought that was really cool because like I would love to see more of universes where Bucky isn't under mind control, like he lived a different life, and that's what fascinates me. So let's do each episode of Bucky. So the first one, he is the Winter Soldier. It's like 1988 or something like that, and it's a different group of people teaming up to be the Avengers. So it's like, what's her name? Captain Marvel's like boss or whatever. Hank Pym. They bring in the Winter Soldier. They're bringing in all these people because Peter Quill has come to attack Earth because he's been sent by Ego, because Ego is like controlling Peter's mind. And Peter doesn't want to do any of these things. He just does it because he doesn't have a way to stop it. And so they end up saving Peter Quill, and I like that. But in all of that, we get Howard Stark in this, like talking to all these people there. He's like the one talking to them, and he ends up not only convincing Bucky as the Winter Soldier not to shoot Peter Quill, but also convinces him to just have a better life. And then he doesn't end up shooting and killing Howard and his wife and all that stuff. And it's so cool to see, because how interesting that just talking about Steve in this universe was enough to break Bucky of his mind control. I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was interesting, and I would love to see more bouts of how Bucky can be broken from mind control in the MCU without Steve. But flip-flop, can Bucky break Steve of mind control is an interesting question, and yes he can. So there's an episode where it's like Captain America, the Winter Soldier, meets Black Widow, and so Peggy Carter is Captain Carter, and Bucky managed to live on and become the senator? Is he the senator? Yeah, he's the senator. And Steve supposedly died. And then they find the Stormbuster like costume, you know, from the first season. We had What If episode with Steve was a Stormbuster, whatever. They find the Stormbuster outfit, and it turns out it's still online, and it's Steve in the costume. And so they try to save Steve, and they do, and he's like, I can take you to the Red Room so that they can take the mind control away, like they can figure it out. But it ended up just being a trap, of course. But the breaking of mind control before they get to the location where they have to go to get to the Red Room is done by Bucky. And I love that so much because, of course, it's Bucky who's the one who's able to save Steve from mind control. I love that even though Peggy Carter is Captain America in this universe, it's a kind of a different universe, it's still Steve and Bucky through and through. And no matter what universe they're in, it's Steve and Bucky always and forever. And that just makes it harder for me, for Marvel to try to convince me that they're not in love with each other and they weren't like gay for each other, because they are gay for each other. Steve and Bucky are so gay for each other, it's not even funny. Like, they're the definition of it. And I get it. Bucky lived in a time, and he's still mentally kind of in a time where that's not okay. But I hope eventually he figures out that it is. And he can be with Sam or something. Because he needs something in his life. Steve left him. The other cool episode I really liked was the Hela one, where she finds the 10 rings. So basically this is like a Thor meets Shang-Chi episode, which I think it's cool how they're combining these like two different movie plots into one, and a 30-minute episode nonetheless. Like, that's fantastic. So in this episode, Hela gets cast out just like Thor did in the first Thor movie, and her helmet is no longer on her, so she doesn't have her powers. She's powerless, and she gets found by Wenwu, of course, who has the 10 rings, and she wants the 10 rings, but she ends up leaving him in his little crazy area, whatever, and she ends up finding Shang-Chi's mom's like community of people, whatever, you know, through the woods and whatever. And within that, she ends up discovering a real life's purpose, and that light defeats darkness, and that she doesn't need to have darkness in her all the time, and she doesn't have to be this dark, horrible person all the time, and she could be a good person. And she ends up becoming better for it. And when her dad comes to look for her because she's gone missing off the map, because this place is not like seen by Heimdall's eyes anymore or whatever, he can't see her anymore. When they come to look for her, she ends up standing up to him and fighting him. And I think it's really beautiful, because I think that episode really shows out Hela is really just an underestimated person who we don't really understand, we don't really get, and she kind of is not been given the tools in her life to be the best person, best version of herself. You know, we've seen Loki get a chance at redemption. We've seen Thor go through all of this and still stay pure and good. We've never seen Hela get any of that. You know, like when we did see Hela, we got her in one movie and she died at the end because, what's his name? Destroyed Asgard and destroyed her with it. The big, I forgot. Surtar? I don't know. Anyway, I've been talking about What If for about 10 minutes. Let's move on to the next show. So the next show I watched this year was Cruel Summer Season 2. And yeah, here's a recurring theme for you guys. I'm very slow. I'm very late. I'm never going to watch things when they come out. I'm always going to be watching them later. But you know what? That's okay. Because now that I'm doing this podcast, when I do eventually watch Suits, because you guys all already did it, you get to hear me talk about it each week on this podcast whenever I get there. I'm not there yet, but when I get there. So anyway, let's talk about Cruel Summer Season 2. So Cruel Summer Season 2 is not like Season 1. It's not the same group of people. It's not the same. So spoiler warning right here, right now, because I don't even know what I'm about to say. I'm trying to remember what even happened because it just wasn't that interesting. I'm sorry, but Season 1 was so good because it was like 3 different years, if I remember correctly, for Season 1, whereas Season 2 is literally over the course of 1 year. Like, all the events of Season 2 happened from like summer of 1999 to summer of 2000. Like all of it happened within 1 year. And the other one having like 3 different years in between. Like there's so much more space for like craziness. And for it to be more realistic that this is like, what? This has been going on this long? And it's crazy. So this season, it's not a like someone was kidnapped and then she killed the kidnapper, whatever story like previous season. This season, somebody just died. And we find out at the end of the first episode that it's Luke Chambers. Now, when you're watching the first episode, you're kind of surprised, maybe. Most people weren't, but I was surprised because I thought it was going to be the Isabella chick because she wasn't in all of the present day stuff. And like the reaction Megan had to the license and everything, I was like, okay, like it must be her. She must be dead. And then it ended up being Luke. And I didn't think about the fact that Luke wasn't in any of the present day stuff either. That's on me, but I don't know. I was still surprised when she showed up, like honestly. In the ending after everything. So that's another problem that I have with this show is it has 3 different like points in the timeline, so like they have to do different colored lighting for this. And what I don't get is like they have the bright normal lighting for the beginning, which is fine. They have super dark like lighting for the late 1999 to you know, and then they have like a kind of mixed sepia, whatever that word is, like it's like a, I don't know, it's like a mix between dark and light. It's a weird color. I don't really know how to describe it. And I was like, I feel like they should have swapped those two, because shouldn't the dark one be the one where they're actually going through like finding out if they're gonna get consequences for what happened? Because they're freaking out. They're like, oh my god, we need to get our story straight. We need to figure out what happened that summer. I mean, we need to figure out what we're gonna say, because, you know, it takes until the end of the show before we actually find out what happened. So, yeah. So, as we're going through this, we find out that Isabella dated Luke first, and then Megan realized that she does like Luke, and so Isabella steps back and lets Megan date Luke, and I thought that was interesting. And somewhere in there, they recorded a sex tape, or Luke recorded them having sex, Luke and Megan, and then he was gonna play one of his brother's tapes at this party to like get his brother like in trouble, and then it ended up being his, and everybody automatically assumed it was Isabella. So then everybody in the town thinks that Luke cheated on Megan with Isabella, because they let everyone think that so that Megan could keep her scholarship, because she can't get in trouble or she's gonna lose her scholarship. And so, because she's getting her scholarship at school or whatever, she's trying to stay good to get her scholarship. And then somewhere down the line, I guess they eventually tell the truth, because they were like telling it to the cops like all the time when they were talking to the cops at the end. So I was like, I don't know, but they kind of have their ups and downs in these friendships. But it's so funny too, because when like literally we see them first meet, like Megan and Isabella, we literally see them meet for the first time in the first season. My question for this show, I feel like it answered it, but I wasn't really paying attention. Why is Isabella here? Who is Isabella? And like, what was the reason for having this Isabella character? Like, just to become Megan's best friend and just like end up destroying her life and ditching her? Because that's like literally what happened. And so then after the sex tape thing, things kind of got crazy, and eventually Megan decides she wants to make Luke pay. So they get him and they tie him up in the cabin, his dad's cabin, and they didn't know that there were cameras. So of course there's like evidence of them doing this. You guys, I know it's like the late 90s, and so it might not be like something you think of, but like the rich family probably got cameras. You should think about that. So they go to the cabin and they're trying to talk to him and get him to confess to these things, and that's when he confesses that he made the sex tape, etc., etc., etc. They'd have him tied up. Somehow Isabella ends up pulling out a gun And they have this camera, they're recording him, and they eventually put it down. And so when it gets put down, Isabella's like not in frame. And so it later does get used against Megan, but whatever. And so Isabella's not in frame and you can't see her. And she ends up shooting Luke in the ear. And so he's like, oh my God, you shot me, I'm bleeding. And, you know, Megan and Isabella kind of have a bit of a fight and they decide to leave. And then Megan decides to talk to him a little bit longer because apparently she's pregnant. What? I'm sorry. You're what? And so then they leave and he's still tied up. He's still there. And he ends up getting untied and he goes out to the dock. And now from the dock, he pages his brother and his brother comes down to talk to him and they end up having a fight and his brother pushes them off the dock. And then he tries to find him and he can't find him. And so when he goes home, he tells his dad that Luke was like underwater and, you know, whatever. But that's what we think happened. That's what they tell us happened, and that he tells Megan all of this because Megan gets arrested based off of the video because she's the only one in frame. She's holding the gun because she took it from Isabella. Like, it looks like she's the one that killed him because, you know, he was shot and that's part of what could have killed him, but that's not what killed him and the cops don't know that. So, anyway. So, we get a scene after she gets released because they arrest the brother and she gets released and she goes out to the dock to say goodbye to him, and then she turns around and she sees like a shimmery glint thing. She gets up closer, she finds out it's a camera. She gets the camera feed for the camera and she watches the footage and we find out that Luke actually got out of the water and Isabella walked up to him, put his face to the ground in the water and drowned him and pushed him out in the water, and she was the one that actually killed him the entire time. And I was like, wait, I knew it, but like, I can't believe it at the same time. Like, it was crazy. So until like the ending, the show really wasn't like that great. I definitely thought season 1 was better in terms of keeping me on my toes and surprised and interested. Maybe it's just because I watch so much mystery stuff that I'm like, this is so predictable. But it did kind of keep me at points. There were points where I was surprised by what was going on. But yeah, for the most part, it wasn't really till the ending that I was like really, really, really surprised. Okay, the final show that I watched for this week is Why Women Kill season 1. Now, I actually haven't finished it. And I wasn't just going to finish it for the podcast because I do have like 3 episodes and I got up late today, so I didn't have the time to do that, but I will finish it and I'll talk about the end next week. I promise. I might just make a video talking about it if I feel like it, like tonight or whatever, whenever I finish it. But for now, I didn't finish it. So I actually started this show last year, so I kind of just started on episode like 4 or 3, episode 3. So because I started on like episode 3, I didn't really like remember episodes 1 and 2, but I mean, it's not too hard to put together. So Why Women Kill is on Paramount Plus, and it's a show about why women kill their husbands, basically. That's not a spoiler, it's in the title, you guys. But the first season and second season are 2 different like storylines, which is fun. So the first season, we have Beth Ann, who's a 1950s housewife with a husband who is, spoiler alert, this is your spoiler warning, her husband is cheating on her with a waitress at the local diner. And she takes charge in her storyline. They have 3 storylines this season. This is 1. She takes charge in her storyline. She ends up befriending the girl that he's having an affair with. And she decides she's going to try to get the girl to split from her husband, to leave her husband alone or leave her husband, whatever, so she can have her husband back. And so in this, she ends up having a conversation with her and she's like, you know, like, how long are you going to be with the married man? And she's like, oh, it's just like a casual fling. Like, it's, I'll give her the husband back to her, like, brand new. She doesn't ever let the waitress girl know that she is the wife of the husband. In fact, when she gives the phone number, she gives the phone number for her neighbor's house who she talks to about this stuff all the time and says, like, you know, when you call, ask for the other Sheila and she'll know. And then, you know, she has to go get the doctor on the phone, whatever. And so she eventually, the girl comes to the house at some point down in the storyline, and like her house, her and her husband's house, and her and her friend are there talking, and she's like, oh my God, she can't see me here because, like, you know, I'm the wife, whatever. And so she has asked her friend to pretend to be the wife. And so her friend pretends to be the wife, and they talk about whatever. And it was crazy. And so after that, I don't know if it's after or before, but we find out that this girl is pregnant. And that is why she won't leave the husband, because she would have under normal circumstances, I guess. But like, okay, this is over, but she's pregnant. And so, of course, Beth Ann is now seriously worried that her husband is going to leave her if he finds out the truth. So when she decides to tell him, she's like crying, she's upset. And he's like, what's wrong? Are you sick? And she's like, yes, I have cancer. She just is like manipulating at this point. And I'm not saying that's okay. I'm just like telling you like what's going on. I think that's absolutely crazy, but this is also 1950s. So she is living in a time where getting a divorce from your husband, or your husband leaving you or whatever, is probably like a really big deal. So I understand her trying to keep her husband, but why not just tell him the truth? Tell him you know about the affair. Like, that's what she's gonna do. Tell him she knows about the affair. Tell him she knows the girl's pregnant, but he doesn't know that the girl's pregnant, and that's the thing. So I guess I'll find out what happens next. Anyway, so there's 3 different timelines. The next timeline is Simone. Now, Simone is a 3-timed married woman with her current husband, and she's got all these friends, and she's like the socialite. She does all the stuff around the town, like the parties, whatever. And by the end of the first episode, she's found out her husband is actually gay. Her husband is gay. So she's, of course, very distraught, very upset, but she decides to stay with her husband because, you know, it's not really like the kind of marriage that is feeding her desires and her needs anyway. And so she decides to stay with him because her daughter is getting married soon and she wants to not look bad. But within this, she ends up having a, like, relationship, if you will, with her best friend's son, who's, like, way younger than her. Like, he's, like, 18 and she's, like, 40. So, weird. Okay, I know, it's weird. And so she's like having this affair with her best friend's son, and eventually they're all like having dinner with the parents, I guess, of the to-be husband of her daughter, whatever, and she ends up telling them like, oh, my husband and I are getting divorced because he's gay. And then he says that she's, you know, having an affair with the son, whatever. And so they both embarrassed each other, and they decide they're gonna get a divorce, but they're gonna stay friends. And so, yeah. And then the final storyline is a throuple. A threesome, if you will. So, I forgot her name. Taylor. It's Taylor. So Taylor is married to a man, and they have an open marriage, but their open marriage is more like they separately go and have relationships with other people. They don't bring them into the house together, but her current girlfriend at the time that she's having her open marriage relationship with is in an abusive relationship. So she gets her out and brings her to the house, and they decide to bring her in. And then they take her in and, like, literally, like, take her in. They're like, you could stay with us. Like, she's at a point where she can go off to Italy, whatever, with these friends of hers. And they ask her to stay with them, like, have a home, because she doesn't want to stay, because she always ends up being the one to get hurt. And she doesn't want to get hurt again. So she's like, I'm going to leave. Like, it's time. I'm getting attached. Like, I need to go before. But they're like, no, you could stay with us, whatever. And so she ends up staying with them. And then the husband is like doing some kind of scripts or something for his job or whatever, and he can't seem to focus, so she gives him some medicine to help him focus, like Adderall, I guess, whatever. This is the present day storyline, by the way. The other one before was the 80s, I think. So she gives him the Adderall to focus, and then of course Taylor gets upset because he was a drug addict, And that's why he doesn't write scripts anymore, because his drugs were what made him write and do all this good writing. Now that he can't do them anymore because he went to rehab, he isn't like selling and he isn't making any money. She's making all the money, and that's some of her problems. So he's trying to get back into making the money, and he ends up back on the pills that the girlfriend gives him or whatever. So it's crazy. So yeah, I don't know how that storyline's gonna end, but we shall find out. But this has been a long talk about TV shows, so let's do the movie recap really quick before we send you on your way and you're done listening to me talk, if you're still listening. So I watched 3 movies this week: Saltburn, A Good Person, and Zombieland Double Tap, because it was finally streaming somewhere, because I've been looking for it forever since I watched the first Zombieland movie, because it wasn't wherever the first one was whenever I watched that one. I don't know what the deal is with movies. I ended up finding it on Hulu, but we do have Hulu Live TV, so it could have been like airing on a TV channel and it was just streaming on there because of that, which is probably why I haven't been able to find it if it's been that way the whole time. But I don't know. So you can go look and see if it's on your Hulu, if you have regular Hulu. So, Saltburn. I have no words. Murder on the Dance Floor being the ending song, perfect. That's literally what happened. That's what happened. Murder. And then he dances at the end. The bathtub scene was weird. Creepy. Like, why are you watching him take a bath? It's just weird. And then he goes up to the bathtub and he like drinks the water as it's like draining. Ugh, disgusting. And I don't know how to describe this movie. It was literally the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I'm never watching it again. Anyway, moving on. A Good Person. So A Good Person is a movie that came out last year, written and directed by Zach Braff, starring Morgan Freeman and Florence Pugh. And so Florence Pugh is a character who gets in this car crash. Her name is Allison, and it really like screws up her life. So spoiler alert. So in the car, when she's in the car, she's on her way to go try on wedding dresses for her soon-to-be sister-in-law, and the sister-in-law's husband is in the car with them. And she ends up she's like looking at her phone for a second and something pulls out and she has to stop, and the way she stops, she turns, and they died in the car crash and she didn't. It punched a hole in her head and that was it. And so she's in the hospital the next time we see her, and she finds out that they died in a horrible way because the police are there to come take blood samples and they haven't told her yet because she just woke up. And so she ends up finding out and she's very upset, very distraught, and her fiance is there. And so then we jump a year later, and a year later we find out she's no longer with her fiance, but we don't find out why off the bat. And so we find out from a year later, she's basically like addicted to Oxy, and she kind of has an alcohol problem as well. And so her mother decides to try to cut her off of the Oxy, and she's like, I thought we were trying to wean off the Oxy. She's trying to be nice about it, and then the mom gets upset and like flushes all the Oxy down the toilet. And you know, of course, Allison's like, I'm not addicted to Oxy. I'm not addicted. Like, I need it. My head really hurts. I need it for the pain. You know, it's been a year. She's supposed to be weaning off of it, but she's also like on her last like bottle of her prescription, so she really does need to like get started on that, but she doesn't want to. And so she tries all these different ways to find Oxy, and eventually I guess she decides to just go to an AA meeting. And she goes to an AA meeting, and she ends up seeing her would-be father-in-law at the meeting. And he comes out to talk to her, and he's like, it's okay, you can come in, you can come to this meeting, it's fine, everything's fine. And she ends up having kind of a relationship, like a friendship, if you will, with the soon-to-be, would-have-been father-in-law. And within that, she ends up meeting and getting to know the daughter of the woman who died in the car with her, the sister-in-law, the soon-to-have-been sister-in-law, because she's now living with her grandpa because her parents died, obviously. And so she gets upset whenever she sees Allison at the house one day, and because Allison's there like looking at the trains with, you know, and she wasn't supposed to be home yet, whatever. And so she gets upset when she realizes who she was, and then she decides to end up becoming friends with her because she doesn't know anybody, she's not friends with anybody. the girl, I forgot her name, and so she ends up deciding to befriend Allison, and they end up going on some interesting adventure. So she's still trying to go to these AA meetings, but she's still like going like, hi, she's not really putting in the effort. She's just going, whatever. And so they end up going to this party, and at the party, the girl gets like really, really drunk, and she ends up getting almost like assaulted sexually. And Allison's trying to open up the door. Her ex is there, you know, the uncle of the girl, and then Grandpa shows up with the chick from the AA meeting who's like the supposed to be Allison's sponsor, whatever, and all this craziness goes down, and they all leave, split parties. The would-have-been father-in-law yells at Allison. It's like, it is your fault. I've looked at all the records. I've looked over it 1,000 times. You were looking at your phone, and that is why what happened happened. It wasn't an accident. It's not something you can blame on somebody else. It was your fault. And she's like, finally accepts it. She's like, okay, it was my fault. And she decides to go to rehab. She goes, takes her dad's Rolex, and she gets the cash for it, which she got like $1,300 or something, and she decides to go to rehab. When she gets out of rehab, she starts working, and she gets a call one day from Nathan. Nathan would have been her husband, the fiance, you know, whatever. And turns out the old man died, the would have been father-in-law. And so they have a funeral service for him, and that's when the movie ends, is at the service. And he leaves her a letter and asks her to help him take care of his granddaughter, who he was taking care of, and now Nathan has to take care of. And it was sad and beautiful, and a beautiful movie on addiction. I love how I literally just explained the whole plot to the movie. Like, you're welcome. It was a beautiful movie on addiction and, you know, how an accident, how something can change your life so much. And it's just, I thought it was beautiful. I cried through like half the movie. It was a wonderful movie to watch, but it was also a really sad movie to watch. And Morgan Freeman and Florence Pugh absolutely killed their performances. I thought they were positively fantastic. And that's that. Okay, so we also need to talk about Zombieland Double Tap. Okay, so Zombieland Double Tap is the sequel. Now, I said earlier I watched it on Hulu. That was fun. I didn't find this sequel to be as fun as the original movie. I do think it's cool that it came out like 10 years later, literally. Like, they released it in 2019, the original came out in 2009. It's interesting to see them all grown up, obviously. But the main character to me in this movie was Zoe Deutch. Zoe Deutch? Dutch. How do you say her last name? I have no idea. I'm just gonna say Deutch, because it's fun. Deutch. I'm an idiot. So, yeah. She was so funny. She has like this Valley girl accent where she like talks like this like all the time, and she's really, really dumb and really, really annoying, but she's the like best part of the whole movie. I can't talk like that, I'm sorry. Oh, there it is. But yeah, she's so funny. So she meets them like early in the movie, just what's his name? Woody Harrelson and Jesse Eisenberg's characters. I can't remember their names. I don't know why. And she ends up like hooking up with Jesse. What's his name? What are their names in this movie? They're named after like where they're from. It's so weird. Tallahassee is Woody Harrelson. Can't remember his name. Jesse Eisenberg, whatever. And they hook up, whatever. And then they end up running into Wichita again. And, you know, he's like in love with her. And it's weird. Because he told Madison all of the Zombieland rules for surviving. And she's like, oh, you told her the rules? Like, you know, like she's kind of jealous, and that's really funny and fun. And they're looking for Little Rock. And that's an interesting little story there, is how they're like looking for her, and she ran off with Avon Gogia's character, who just sings all the time with his guitar, which I think is so funny because we never get to hear him singing Victorious, but like, yeah, he can sing, let's not forget. He's kind of like on drugs, whatever. He's chill, he's mellow, whatever. The best part of this whole movie for me, though, besides Zoe Dutch medicine, is when they go to Graceland and Woody Harrelson's Tallahassee, sorry, is like, it doesn't even, like, the way Graceland looked so funny, though his reaction is hilarious, and it's by far one of the funniest scenes. That and Madison was so great. But Madison was funny too because they think she's about to turn into a zombie at one point, so they get her out the car, and Jesse has to go shoot her, whatever, Jesse Eisenberg character. I still can't remember his name. And he doesn't shoot her, I guess, but they don't tell us that until like later on in the movie. And then she's driving down the road in like an ice cream truck, and they're like, how is she still alive? And it's literally so funny because, like, how is she still alive? She's like the dumbest person in the world. And she's had to be saved by a zombie probably once or twice by them. And so it's so funny to me that she's still alive. And it's just great. Her character was awesome. And I need more Zoe Dutch roles in my life. Okay, so I did finish and read one whole book throughout this week, and it was Good Girl, Bad Blood. It is the second book in the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. I read the first one last year. I read that one this week, and I'm now reading As Good as Dead, the next one. So hopefully I finish it before next week's episode so we can talk about it. So, spoiler alert. Let's go. So Good Girl, Bad Blood is the sequel, and so for the most part, it doesn't really delve into anything that happened in the first book, other than Max Hastings' trial case, where they're trying to get him, they all want him to be guilty. They all want the verdict to be guilty, because he raped girls and sold them drugs and whatever. But let's get to the plot of this book, because that's what's really important. So in this book, one of her friends' brother goes missing, Jamie Reynolds. Jamie Reynolds is a 24-year-old man who just suddenly up and disappeared, and they're trying to figure out like what happened to him. So over the course of the book, they piece together all these different things. They see his computer is still there, and so they try to get in, and they try like 800 different combinations of passwords. 800, like it's insane. And they end up getting in, and they find out they have the Fitbit app on there, and so they find out, like, from his heartbeat and whatever, and his distance and his steps walked and whatever, that how far he could have walked, and they get, like, different people telling him when they saw Jamie, when they last saw Jamie, and they put together kind of a timeline of where he could have gone. And so they go out for a search party, and they look in one direction, they look in another. They find a missing knife from the kitchen of Jamie's family, just dropped on the ground somewhere. Not bloody, nothing. Eventually, they figure out that the whole thing has to do with this Layla Mead that he was talking to on his phone. Is it raining? It is. And so they're talking to this Layla Mead character. He's talking to this Layla Mead on the phone, and she's somehow convinced him, this is a big spoiler, she's narrowed down her search for this child Brunswick to 2 people. And so he needs to go to these 2 people and say the name Child's Brunswick to them and see what their reaction is, and then try to kill them for her. But it turns out the her wasn't really a her, it was a neighbor of Pip. Pip is the main character of the story who's doing this investigation, and he ends up being someone who was related to someone that Child's Brunswick killed for his father, because his father was a murderer. Crazy story. I don't even know how to explain this, like, literally. And so he goes out for the run. I forgot his name. I forget the names, and that's the problem with me. It's like, I want to talk about it with their names, but I don't know their names. And so they figure out who it is before he does, and they go to his house, and it ends up being Stanley Forbes, some dude in town, and he's like, they set me up with a name, whatever, I've lived here my whole life, I don't want to have to, move again, like, don't tell anyone. And Pip's like, I won't tell anyone, but, my friends are at your house trying to get Jamie out, and he's like, did they break a window? And she's like, yeah, and I was like, then it's already over, the cops are there. And so then the dude shows up, and we find out ends up being Layla Mead, and it has a crazy thing, and he kills Stanley Forbes. the dude, and sets the building on fire with Pip in it, and so Pip has to get out, and she drags Stanley out. She tries to save Stanley, but it's too late. And then, but she's found out before all of this that Jamie is okay. Jamie was at the house the whole time. Stanley just kept taking care of him. They made a deal. They were just going to find out who Layla Mead was, and then he would let Jamie go. So Jamie was just missing this whole time because he was stuck at he was kidnapped, but you know, he was kind of okay with it. But at first he wasn't. He whatever. So yeah, that was kind of crazy. Yeah. But those books do only seem to have like the crazy reveals at the end of the story. And as for the Max Hastings verdict, he was found not guilty, and so Pip's very upset. So of course she releases a audio of him confessing it, and you know, that ties into the next book. So we'll talk about that with the next one. Anyway, that's all for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. We're going to be talking about everything I watch weekly, so I'll do season 2 of Why Women Kill and the rest of season 1 next week, as well as whatever else I watch. I'll probably get back into watching Heroes, so we shall see. It's probably going to be season 2 of Why Women Kill and season 2 of Heroes, because even though that one's short, I like to read more, so I hope you guys enjoy the podcast and stay up to date with your pop culture.